Welcome to Pulp Tales, fascinating stories of the pulp magazines and the creative minds that brought them to life. The fictioneers, the artists, the editors, and others. Brought to you by the PulpNet. Learn more about the pulp magazines through articles, blogs, bibliographies, links, over 100 episodes of this podcast, and much more at the PulpNet. Your link to the pulp magazines for almost 30 years. Online at thepulp.net.
This always reminds me of The Man in the High Castle, which is a fine novel. I think Purple Invasion is superior to it. I felt again that old, for science fiction fans, that sense of wonder, but this was that sense of excitement by reading The Purple Invasion.
In this episode of Pulp Tales, pulp collectors Tom Krabacher and Kurt Shoemaker profile Operator 5, America's Secret Service ace. Popular Publications introduced its Operator 5 pulp magazine 90 years ago, in April 1934. This Pulp Tales was recorded at PulpFest 2024 in Pittsburgh on Friday, August 2nd, 2024. Tom begins.
Operator 5, the pulp series consists of 49 pulps or issues, each with a separate 50 to 55,000 word novel in them. And they were written by three authors, Fred Davis, Emil Tepperman, and Wayne Rogers. To organize things a bit, we're following actually a structure that Will Murray proposed some years ago. And we're going to talk about the stories in three blocks based around the author. I'm going to start with the general introduction, talk about Fred Davis. Kurt will do Emil Tepperman, which is the whole Purple Invasion run. And then if people are still awake, we'll try to wrap it up briefly with a discussion of Wayne Rogers. So let's begin. This is the 90th anniversary of Operator 5, and the pulp's origin owes its existence to Harry Steger. As most of you know, Steger was the co-founder and publisher of Popular Publications, which in the 1930s became the largest pulp publishing house in the United States. Steger traveled to Europe in the early 1930s, and what I'm going to read here is actually a quote from him, which he gave in an interview in Xenophile, the pulp fanzine, back in the 1980s. Steger stated that during the 1930s, having witnessed the economic and social conditions at home and in Europe, he was, to use his words, very anxious at the time to say something about the depression and the political elements of the world in the popular magazines he published. And Operator 5, probably more than any other, although we see traces or signs of this periodically in The Spider, illustrates this. Now, the theme of the Operator 5 is basically the overarching theme of the series was America under attack, invasion by hostile powers, and it's important to stress that this was not a new concept. It's actually part, or was part of a literary tradition or a genre, I guess you could say, that existed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It started in the UK and their fear of war or invasion from Germany. But in the United States, it began to emerge around the time of the First World War. Here's an example. It's from a book called The Conquest of America, a romance of disruption, disaster and victory by Cleveland Moffett. Here's another example of it, and this is just from the advertisement on the back of Everybody's Magazine in 1924. And what's important about this, I think, is partly the headline or the blurb with the question mark, will there be another great war in 30 years? And clearly that was sensationalized to try to draw readers' attention to what's in everybody's, but it also points out the fact that the possibility of war and invasion was on the public's mind. Popular gets in the game with its Dusty Airs and its Battlebird series, which basically it ran, I think, for a dozen issues, and it basically, each issue concerned a battle against a foreign invader known as Fire Eyes. They're written by Robert Sidney Bowen, who wrote a lot of aviation stories, so all the novels have aviation themes, and they were really pretty lightweight, but it was part of the theme. We see it elsewhere, and as we move into the 30s, we see war and danger of invasion increasingly becoming central to a lot of pulp magazines. In 1939, it's seen as directly involving the United States, with at this time what clearly looks like a Japanese opponent or Japanese enemy. When Steger elected to go ahead with Operator 5, the question was who was going to write it, and the person who was selected was Frederick C. Davis. Davis was already well established as a pulp writer. He began writing in the 1920s to help pay his way through college. He moved into writing full time. He was well established writing crime and detective fiction. He had a number of series throughout his career. His best known one at the time was the Moon Man series, which had appeared a year or so earlier. And he seemed a logical choice, I think, to Steger and the people at Popular to take on the series, because Davis showed basically he could make deadlines, and with Operator 5 appearing monthly, you needed someone who could turn in a novel a month. And he was someone who also could write very effectively. He also is known for a number of other things. Probably his most colorful title was The Mole Men Want Your Eyes, which was one of the stories in one of the Weird Menace Pulp's horror stories in May of 1938 or so. But despite this, or because of this, he was chosen to create and write Operator 5. Now, this raises an interesting question, that is, who actually created the character and who actually plotted the books. Steger said in his interview that he plotted each of the novels. They all were ones that he identified and plotted. The explanation or the account from Davis was that Davis did everything. All the details, he created the characters, he created the plots, and the various features that supported the stories. I think those two ideas or statements can be reconciled because, as Robert Sampson wrote in his book concerning The Spider, another popular publication, Steger, as a general publisher, wouldn't have had time to monitor or advise on the content of each issue of the 30 plus pulp magazines Popular was producing at the time. And it seems more likely the practice for The Spider, and what seems likely the practice for Operator 5 as well, was that Steger would handle a general theme or an idea off to Rogers Terrell, who was the editor of the specific editor for Operator 5. And Terrell would work with with Frederick Davis to come up with the details of the character and the plot. Now, as for the details, Here's Jimmy Christopher, known as Operator 5. And right away we find in the very first issue of the magazine that this is not his real name, it's a pseudonym, and that Curtis Steele, the author, the house name for the author or author of the Operator 5 novels, was getting these stories straight from the real Operator 5 himself. Jimmy, well, we use Jimmy Christopher as a name, even though we know it's a fake. Jimmy is described as a young man in his 20s, good-looking, physically fit, confident and self-assured, and incredibly talented in all sorts of different areas. He is an expert in over 5 or 6 languages, I forget the exact number. He's a master fencer. He knows jujitsu. He's an expert marksman. He's a code breaker and cryptologist or cryptanalyst, pick your term. And generally speaking, is all-round perfect in just about every way. And that illustration is one of many that we'll see later on, is a representation of Operator 5 by John Fleming Gould, who was the artist for the interiors for most of the series. On a couple of occasions, others did it. And Davis apparently created all the accoutrements that go with the character. He created the details of the U.S. intelligence service, to which Jimmy is an agent under the code number of Operator 5. He created, or he comes up with the various skills that Jimmy has, including the various aliases he uses and pseudonyms he operates under. And he creates the characters that accompany or appear continuously in the series. So there's Jimmy's father, who was an intelligence officer before him, before he had heart problems which invalided him out of active duty. There's his twin sister, Nan. There's this is Pulp in the 30s, so you have to have a sidekick mascot for the hero. So there's Tim Donovan, the plucky young Irish lad who saves Jimmy's life at one point and is adopted by him. And then later on, a couple issues later, we meet Diane, what's her last name?
Elliot.
Diane Elliott, sometimes spelt with 1 T, sometimes with 2, who is a reporter who eventually becomes an intelligence agent in her own right, and is, to the extent there is a romantic interest, she is the individual involved. When Davis was brought in, met with Terrell, his specific editor, and Steger, the publisher, and basically they gave him the charge for the entire series, which is that every month the United States must be invaded or attacked by, and basically threatened with destruction by some enemy, either foreign or domestic. And Davis was set to go with that. To help him along, they even showed him the cover for the first issue that he had to write his first story to fit. This cover is by Jerome Rosen, and later covers will be done by John Newton Howard. And the cover art is important in the series because it really conveys a lot of the emotional intensity that the stories tend to display. And that emotional intensity, which you also find in The Spider, is something that's very characteristic of popular character pulps or hero pulps. Unlike, say, Doc Savage or the Spider, where you follow the main characters, the heroes around. There's a sense of confidence in them that they know what's going on and they're in charge of the situation. In both the Spider, but particularly in Operator 5, it's a situation where the crisis is severe, the stakes are high, but the cost, personal cost to Jimmy Christopher is very high as well. So they're very emotionally charged. The magazine itself, its format is pretty much this. There's your lead novel. There's usually 2, but sometimes only 1 short story to follow up. And then there's a department which is written by the editor, or maybe occasionally written by Davis, directed at the readers. Here it is, The Secret Sentinel. And in this one, this tells us that Jimmy Christopher is a pseudonym, and it warns the readers about threats to the United States. There's a kind of paranoia theme which stresses fear throughout the series. And it warns readers what they have to do to be alert to help. Buying the magazine is one of the things. If you look at the picture of Jimmy Christopher on the top, he's wearing a mask. And he had a mask we use occasionally in the first 2 or 3 novels, but that was dropped very quickly. But you'll also notice he has a sword. And one of the key characteristics or key gimmicks, if you will, that Jimmy used was the fact that he had a sword, a rapier, hidden in his belt. Not in the sheath, but it was in the belt itself. And whenever trouble emerged, he'd take off his belt, slide off the leather sheath, and he'd be standing there with a described as a short rapier. And that shows up all the time. Just some examples here. Time-wise, I'm not going to go into detail for a lot of the stories, but just give you a feel of what some of those are about. Here is the cover for Master of Broken Men, which, as you can see, appeared 5 months after the magazine premiered. The plot in this one is a villain known as the Man-Breaker, who always wears a mask. Villains frequently wear masks. Who basically kidnaps industrialists or political leaders and terrorizes them and breaks their will and essentially brings them in under his control. In this case, the Man-Breaker is threatening to shove an industrialist into a vat of molten metal in a factory, and Jimmy has to figure out who this guy is, what he's doing, because what he is doing is not just taking control of government or industry, but using it to secretly aid an unnamed foreign power. Speaking of foreigners and speaking of John Fleming Gould, here's the splash page art for Master of Broken Men. It illustrates the opening scene of the novel where at a gala formal ball in Washington, D.C. with bigwigs and hoity-toity people from society, including the vice president, are attending, and so is Jimmy. Suddenly, the doors fly open and a gang of natives, it's not specified natives of whom, break into the ballroom and start killing everybody. Jimmy whips off his belt, whips out the rapier, and immediately starts fighting them. And we're on our way. Off we go in the story. And along the way, there's Tim, there's Nan. Diane hasn't shown up yet, and the Secret Service, under Jimmy's guidance, is pursuing the villains. It ends, as they usually do, with a violent confrontation. This case, death by alligator. You can see that Jimmy Christopher, in his hand, has pulled the mask off of the villain after they've staged a dramatic duel over a pit of alligators. The interesting thing about this is, one of the interesting things about it is that in many ways the villain could be entirely domestic. but given the charge to Davis to bring in the foreign threat, frequently these villains are working for unknown foreign powers. The identity of those foreign powers gradually will become apparent as the series goes on. Here's another one, and this is probably the iconic cover of the Operator 5 series. This is what got me, when I was just learning about pulps, interested in this magazine far more than any other, because it's reproducing Tony Goodstone's The Pulps. But it catches the feel that is characteristic of many of the Operator 5 novels, which is they're apocalyptic. The doom is hanging over the country very quickly. And the four horsemen of the apocalypse in the sky, symbolically above the mob, is illustrated of that. It also illustrates another characteristic of many of the stories, which is that, at least from the author's point of view, the American public is very gullible and easily led astray. So we find that we have, in novel after novel after novel, society, it's not just external threats, but society is under threat of breakdown through lack of faith in government or lack of faith in institutions. And it's helped along by, again, John Fleming Gould, too many Johns with middle names in there. John Fleming Gould's splash panel art, which is just, for me, exquisite. And it's my favorite novel in the series. Might not be the best, but it's my favorite. One more, Army of the Dead. Some people, I won't name names, The Who, have written it. This is the most ridiculous novel in the Operator 5 series, which is kind of hard to believe if you know what some of the other novels are. But basically, your master villain, the Master of Death, brings back the dead, mobilizes them against society. Tim Donovan, the plucky young Irish lad who's Jimmy's mascot, is killed at one point, but somehow or another is brought back. And in many ways, it's very typical of the plot. At the end, things are resolved and order is restored. But what struck me about it when I read this back in the early 70s, it was one of the first ones I read, was that this was one of the few character pulps, probably the only one at the time, where real conditions in the country at the time figured into the plot. Davis makes reference and use to the depression, the despair, and the sense of helplessness that populations, in this case we're talking about in rural areas, I think, and if I recall places like Tennessee and so forth, where a lot of this is set, that allow the population to be misled by peoples like the Master of Death, who is the key villain in this one. This is possibly one of the more famous Operator 5 novels, Blood Reign of the Dictator. And this is a thinly disguised, or at least inspired by Huey Long rising to power as governor of Louisiana. And in this, a southern governor, Cyrus Young is his name, manages to rise to power with the help of foreign agents, takes over politics in the United States, is elected president, sets up, dissolves Congress and the Constitution, sets up a guillotine on the Washington Mall, as you can see right here, in front of the Capitol. And it's up to Jimmy to save the day. But it's, again, playing or trying to play, like Steger wanted, on current events that were prominent in the minds of many Americans at the time.
Did the Supreme Court support them in that?
Yeah, the Supreme Court approved it.
They just added more justices.
Yeah, they just added more justices after that. And finally, Tavern of the Damned is interesting because the plot is an assault on religion in America, on churches in the United States, which is a fairly clever plot and one of the better novels by Davis. But I think it reflects one of the challenges Davis was facing, which is month after month come up with a new threat or invasion of sorts to the United States. Eventually, Eventually, Davis quits the magazine after the first 20 novels. And he admitted when interviewed about it in later years why that was the case. He said, first of all, it was hard, just too hard, coming up with foreign invasions or plots. Fictitious countries, such as the Yellow Empire, a thinly disguised Japan, and various European countries, thinly disguised Germany or Italy. And he also mentioned he was getting paid more money for writing other things, so he stepped away. And the person who follows after that is Emil Tepperman, and I'm going to hand that over to Kurt.
I get the clicker of power.
Yeah. And Emil Tepperman is responsible for the Purple Invasion, which is what most people think of when they think of Operator 5 today.
Yes, people think of the 13 novels of the Purple Invasion primarily, though it wasn't called always the Purple Invasion. At first they were the Central Empire, after the Central Powers of Europe at the time, relating to real things. And these people who invaded America spoke, well, they weren't identified. It's a Ruritanian country of Baclavia, I think. Baclaria, yeah, sorry. That's something else. They were Baclarians, and it was a modified von Schiffleren plan. I don't know the pronunciation, but they were sweeping through Canada and coming down into the United States, like the Germans did through Belgium and then into France.
Sleeping plant.
Sorry?
Sleeping plant.
Yes, and they also got Belgium and the Low Countries at the same time in the European wars, so that was convenient. That was helpful. These novels have a huge sweep. There's casts of millions. Of course, we have our heroes up front, but then there's the middle ground characters, and then there's everyone else. I was reading probably the second novel, and I realized that Tepperman was very aware of the foreground, middle ground, background, which I never noticed when it's not there necessarily. But I noticed it in this case when it was there, like I noticed it in the Titanic, where we have, of course, Jack and Rose, and then we have Guggenheim and Molly, and then we have the guy that bounces off the propeller, right? So background and all that. And it's just huge. It takes years, and this is a history as well. And if Curtis Steele is to be believed, because it is a history, then after a series of devastating losses, we started winning 9.2 miles from here in a town called Freedom, Pennsylvania. Most of the action in the siege of the 1,000 Patriots takes place in Pittsburgh, and it's perhaps my favorite one of the 13 novels. And everything that I Googled about him, about the stories rather, that Tepperman was writing, were real places, except for that 500-foot dam on the Ohio that Jimmy Christopher dynamites and kills 20,000 of the Purple soldiers, Purple Army, and all. And I've got notes here on I'm not going to summarize them all. If you want to read Tom introduced it to me, but it's an excellent summary of the whole series, second to ours, naturally, is Will Murray's. It appeared in Pulp Monger, but I don't know the number of it.
It was a one-off edited by Jim
Oh, it's
Van
not a part of the
Hise.
series, yeah. James Van Hise. It's just an excellent long piece that Will wrote.
It's called The Three Worlds of Jimmy Christopher.
Yeah. And there are a number of things if you want to read more about or learn more about the Purple Invasion and Jimmy Christopher in general. Nick Carr wrote a book, America's Flying Spy.
No, that's GA.
No, well, there's one.
America's Secret Service.
Secret Service, thank you. Yes, that's it. Yeah. And then there's Harrison Stevers, who is the historian. These stories are full of footnotes. So Harrison Stevers is credited by Tom Johnson, who really wrote it, who was a nice guy from Seymour, Texas, pretending to be the historian of it and writing from his notes. And there is a book, I think, waiting to be written, The Memoirs of Jimmy Christopher. I gotta slow down a little bit. Because they allude to that in the footnotes. So every time I write about this, I've written a couple of articles and all, I put a footnote in there just as an homage, I guess you could say. But the 13 novels, and I think there might be 15, because it sort of ends and it sort of tapers off. It's not really conclusive. It gets perhaps a little confused even at the end, like all these people start attacking, we got Italians fighting each other, or maybe that's the novels after it. But anyway, we got Death's Ragged Army is the first one, Patriots, Death Battalion, The Bloody 45 Days, all sorts of things happen. They attack trains, steal gold, buy planes from South America, they attack the Purple Empire's fleet that's off San Francisco, they destroy the Panama Canal.
There's Emil Tepperman.
Yeah.
We don't know much about him. Last we know is he lived, I think, on Long Island in the 1940s. And he worked for radio after the Pulps, but nobody's been able to track anything down about him.
Okay, just about every novel has vignettes of all the main characters in different poses. You know, our spunky Tim Donovan and dashing Jimmy and Nan and Diane, who, speaking of which, occasionally do get captured and freed. But Emil doesn't overdo that too much where it's not a string of capture and escape, but it does happen. And then the bad guys get as well. Frida and Tim, they're in love, but she disappears by about novel 10. There's Jimmy. Yeah, Death's Ragged Army, the first one. The series begins about 22 days after the invasion. It's almost as if, I say almost as if, it reads strongly like there's a novel missing. I mean, in Medias Res, we know you start in the middle of things, but this guy starts past the middle, somewhere where it's already well developed. And they're digging trenches around Ohio to stop the advance of the Purple Army in Death's Ragged Army. Things move fast, though, because Rudolph I has only been in the United States, a few novels later, a year or so, and he's already at the Continental Divide unlike the Japanese in real life, who were rather leery about invading America because they were cautioned, if you do that, there will be a rifleman behind every blade of grass. That was real, though. This is...
That's one of the footnotes.
Oh, that's one of the footnotes. That's the one about, yes. When I got into pulps, I didn't think it'd be a gateway to buying Reader's Digest magazine. But I did. I read this footnote. Emil Tepperman mentions a certain issue of Reader's Digest that made a huge impression on him, apparently. And I went on eBay and found it, and it was delivered for about $5.50. It was just a total surprise. And 2 other articles are in that Reader's Digest, just sort of thematically linked, about the coming war and a profile on Der Fuhrer. So, you know, And that was 1936 there, as well as an opening piece, an essay from Saturday Evening Post by Rose Wilder Lane, who was a good friend of Talbot Mundy's, as well as the daughter of Laura Ingalls Wilder. And there it is, yeah. And this is not juvenile literature, it's pulp literature, but there are some really horrible things that happen in this story, in these stories. If this were real, of course, it'd be much worse than what Jimmy Christopher went through. There'd be, because he doesn't describe necessarily, except in one sentence, the millions who suffer or died, but the word rape gets used several times in this. This is actually something that happens. And it's a dingbat they use quite a bit. They like it. The editor, layout guys. Just horrible things happen. Some of it is deliciously pulpy, though, because I'm not going to do summaries. I'm just going to make comments on things that I enjoyed about it, where to thwart the attacking Americans, the Purple Army puts up thousands of Americans on crucifixes in front of the battle lines, which, is an incredible image to me, and it should be to anyone, just if you can really imagine it as a practical effect.
We don't have the slide in here, but one of the interior illos just shows that in silhouette.
Right, yeah. And they couldn't quite, I guess, bring themselves to it, but this always reminds me of The Man in the High Castle, which is a fine novel, but I recently watched the TV version of it, and I think Purple Invasion's superior to it. It's The Man in the High Castle TV show has some good moments to it, but this is consistently exciting. It's clunky, but the writing has this headlong thrust to it, where it just is. I wasn't really jaded with pulps, but it really, I felt again that old, for science fiction fans, that sense of wonder, but this was that sense of excitement by reading The Purple Invasion. And usually, not always, but usually, the cover illustrates something that happens in the last few pages.
But if you look at the covers for The Purple Invasion, you'll notice that the intensity ratchets up. In the early Purple Invasion stories, like in the issues that went before, Jimmy Christopher has a sport coat, a tie, sometimes a vest, always a fedora. And notice, for example, that the hat is missing here. As we move further in the series, we'll see that he is more and more in dishabille.
And more, perhaps seriously, yes, he's doffed the fedora, but by the end of the series, outside of The Purple Invasion, he's actually emotionally scarred and jaded and hurt and damaged. At one point, he wondered, why do I even go on? Just let it happen. There is some realism to it. I think sometimes it's not entirely true, the War and Peace of the Pulps, but there is some credence to that statement of it. The range of characters, the hundreds of characters, the sweep of the story, it's 3,000 miles of the United States instead of Russia.
One of the nice things that the Purple Invasion has is that it treats the United States, the place, as a very real place. There are maps, there are specific locations that are cited. When you see movements of troops or placements of troops, it's spelled out for the readers to see.
Yeah, there really is a freedom, Pennsylvania. Yeah, the Battle of the Continental Divide is important. Along with the Battle of the Continental Divide, this is a long series. It's about 2 years of invasion. Early battles, early victories enter folklore. I mean, this is really quite a clever first draft in many places, where people take pride, remember Snyder Pass, or we won at Snyder Pass. An early battle, and a mayor from a small town then is followed as he rises up to become become one of the presidents before he's assassinated by some, I guess you could call them quislings, but traitors. There is also aside from background, foreground, middle ground, there is something with time as well. As time is going on, I'm not making great literary comments about this, but there is memory in this. The people have memory of what we have done and what we hope to do. It's unlike, as I mentioned earlier to Tom, it's not a Bewitched episode where whatever happens last week is entirely forgotten in the new episode. This is the Siege of the Thousand Patriots, and it's deliberately, I'm sure, she's echoing the North Church. She's waving a torch instead of 1x2 and whatever it was there in the old North Church tower. They're up on Mount Washington, which from the pictures I saw on the internet looks like a really neat place where it rises above the river. Tramway you can take, I think, up there. I'm not from this part of the country, but so I had to get it all secondhand. And here is for our sing-along afterwards, the Purple Empire's Horst Wessel song, where we can, it's the marching song or the anthem of as we cross America, killing Americans. They really went out of their way to carefully make a history. Oh, and that's when they blew up the dam, and it was a gravity dam too, so it's 500 feet tall and just of rocks and dirt stacked on top of each other. Urslop the Strong defeats him in hand-to-hand combat. Near the end of the series, he's just one of the enemies that are attacking America along with other nations. And he's a Goth, and they're all waiting to invade around New York. And I think it was in the Bloody 45 Days, in one of the footnotes, not a footnote, a blurb to the story, in the second or third novel, for those who know about the, the Black Empire with the spider?
Yeah, Black Police.
That's it. That was 1936, and that was 1938, I believe. So with publishing times and who else, putting a manuscript in a drawer, I've heard people speculate there might be some crossover. I don't know which way it went. But in the blurb, Jimmy Christopher is actually called Jimmy Wentworth in print. Yeah. So someone, that might be some evidence for something from manuscript sleuths. Yes, Tom.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say, one of the things that is characteristic of Operator 5 that has not been the case in any other character pulp or series I've seen is the attempt to establish verisimilitude, even if it's just suspension of disbelief for the moment you're reading the story. And footnotes are a key part of that. Fred Davis introduced the idea. For Davis, the footnotes basically would relate events in the story to what was going on in the real world. And they could be lengthy. In Legions of Starvation, for example, there's a 220-word footnote talking about food supplies in the food production industry in the United States at the time. And Tepperman in The Purple Invasion followed that as well, although his footnotes tended to primarily relate to events within the story. But they both authors tried to anchor what was going on in the text to some broader reality.
For example, through the series, if I may jump in on that, by about novel 8 or 9 in the series, both sides are running out of resources, and America, of course, is being devastated. And they're starting to use cavalry charges and ride horses and have wagons, which I thought, like the folklore, is a neat little touch to have in there and realistic as well. And in one of the footnotes, Tepperman says, if you think there aren't enough horses in America, and then he quotes the World Almanac of 1938, I think it was by that point, or 37 maybe. And as my own footnote, that amateur radio article in the Reader's Digest, he cites it in just about every episode after that, where he says, communications were ruined in America, and if it weren't for heliographs and carrier pigeons and and the amateur radio hobbyists, America would not have been able to fight the enemy as well.
Okay, just a couple points to mention about both the Davis and Tepperman stories is that there's a very strong thematic unity to them. One is patriotism is really played up here, very positively. The other is that there are foreign entanglements. Even in cases where there are seemingly domestic villains, there's always some foreign power behind them. And initially they're thinly disguised. For example, the Yellow Empire is just a thinly disguised Japan. But as we get closer to the outbreak of World War II, where the sides are more obvious, the stories become a little more obvious as well. Super science factors into it. Davis liked pseudoscientific rays. That there's one that would shut out all power in New York City and later across the country. There's a blizzard ray that would produce snow and blizzards in New York City in the middle of July. So there's the super science, and there are, I mentioned briefly, there's a kind of willingness to believe that the American population is incredibly gullible. Yeah. Do you want to talk briefly about?
Briefly about Wayne Rogers.
All right, why don't you do that?
Which is a writer apparently about as much as known about Wayne Rogers as is known about Emil Tepperman, except that he opened or started or worked for a movie theater after he gave up writing. But he wrote the last 6 or 7 novels. Only 4 of those are of a new series starting up. The others are sort of tapering off, confused. Who do we have invade now of the Purple Invasion? The Italians. And the Mongols appear out of nowhere in North Dakota. They're a big threat as well. But Jimmy Christopher smuggles a portable record player through enemy lines and plays it for Rinaldi and stops trouble from happening. Anyway, there's a lot of, it becomes almost toing and froing, if you know what I mean. Invasions and fights and secret weapons. There's one novel where I think there's 4 secret super weapons that are used in one book. And while they're pretty neat, rays that devastate whole states, and a tank that's 60 feet tall, I think. The series ends before it comes to a conclusion, but the other one didn't either. The Operator Number 5 was canceled before the next proposed novel. How far it was going to go with this invasion of the Yellow Vulture, I don't know. But the last novel actually does sort of end in a climactic way. This is 1939 November, and they were putting that issue to bed right about the time when the Germans were running across the border into Poland, September 1st, 1939. I lost my train of thought there for a second. I know. Sorry. That was my cue. The Japanese used an atomic bomb on Washington, D.C. at the end of that novel, which is one heck of a climactic finish. Even if there isn't that last novel, you still have something incredible going on for pulp thrills, I guess we could call it.
Just to sort of wrap it up and maybe allow a little time for Q&A. Just a quote about the Operator 5 series as a whole was, this comes from another source, but it goes, where other pulp magazines commonly dealt with individual heroes and villains, the storytelling in Operator 5, in Steger's own words, quote, assumed a broader canvas, dealing with whole nations and armies, frequently linking story elements to contemporary happenings. So there is a central character or group of characters, but the picture is always much broader. And that was what Steger in that opening quote, I think, was aiming for, which is to say something about the depression and the political elements of the time, in the pulp magazines he was publishing. Okay, we're getting off this.
Hey, Tom,
Yeah.
no magic tricks?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's an interesting point. If you've ever read any of the Davis Operator Fives, Jimmy Christopher would always, in the middle of things, you know, they could be in an airplane whose engines are on fire and they're crashing into a mountain, will stop and show Tim Donovan, his young mascot, a magic trick. And it was a regular feature of it. Those tend to disappear as you move into the Purple Invasion. And
Only the swords, the belt sword
the
survives.
belt sword is still there, but things become a little more serious, and it probably reflects the change of authorship as much as anything.
So the Donovan, is that any relation to like the Wild Bill Donovan? Is like a real person?
Probably not, because he wouldn't. The OSS and all that wouldn't be known at this point by popular people, or the common.
Yeah.
I don't like popular. I don't like common. The average American.
The term operator, like Operator 5, was actually a term used as an identifier in the U.S. Secret Service. That is the Treasury Department Secret Service. But I don't know anything about the intelligence service.
Was there any recognition on the part of the popular publications that amongst the hero pulps of the 30s, there were only two of them in which the main character was not a veteran of World War I? One was the Avenger, as far as I know, and the other one was Operator 5. Every other character, every other hero pulp, that character started out in World War I in some role. Was there any recognition that we've got a young hero here, as opposed to an older hero? Because that's...
I don't know that was ever spelled out. I know it specifically in the early novels describes as part of the boilerplate description a young man in his early 20s. So that would speak to someone who was too young to be in the war.
And for me, when I was reading these, I was thinking, trying to figure out whether Tepperman had served himself, you know, the mystery man and all that. And I could find, he was really good, I think, at strategy, the big sweep of things. But every now and then, he'd have a little thing that made me think either he served behind the lines or didn't serve at all. Like at one point, he had soldiers take off their bayonets, and it's unclear, but it looked like they were getting ready to fire, but they had to take their bayonets off first. And everyone uses carbines, which...
Yeah.
Quick and not exactly a question. So in the mid-1960s, the sleaze publisher, Corinth Greenleaf, puts out a selected batch of Operator 5s. Do you have any idea what was up with that and why? And it's probably illegal, I mean.
Yeah, I heard that he did that. He did some others. He did Phantom Detective and so forth. And part of it was to provide legitimate cover as a publisher because of the sleaze stuff he was putting out.
You know what, you talked about, like the last novel talked about the Japanese dropping an atomic bomb. Do you think there was any influence for Harry Truman, or was there any sort of influence on the general populace of the United States, the Americans, who might have provided an influence for Truman to drop the atomic bomb actually?
This would have been about 6 years before.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
understand that.
yeah.
Was there any general sentiment in the United States that would, one, lead to that being written, but also lead to the U.S.?
Well, there was awareness that this was theoretically possible. You know, the fear was that other powers like that madman over there would get a hold of it. Choose your madman, but in this case, Hitler, of course. I think it was just part of the zeitgeist, you might say, that it was awareness that the super weapon, you know, was possible. Like Cleve Cartmill said that he didn't write anything in, what is it, blow-ups happen?
A deadline.
Deadline that wasn't readily available in just government documents and magazines, I think.
One of the backdrops for the Operator 5, the early ones, was the Zimmerman note, the Zimmerman plot, in which Germany they had intercepted a message or something where Germany was trying to forge some kind of relationship with Mexico to invade the United States. This came out in the tens, I think.
That was recognized. A lot of the plots have invaders coming from Mexico or Canada, and one of the Davis footnotes does make reference to that.
So does one of the Rogers footnotes.
Okay.
But going back to 1806, unless that's a typo.
Yeah, it was
Some
imperial
filibuster
18th
thing.
century.
Yeah.
It was imperial Germany, it wasn't the 30s.
There is someone over
Yeah,
here.
but similar theme going on.
We gotta stop. We gotta stop. No,
All right, sorry.
You've been listening to Pulp Tales, fascinating stories of the pulp magazines and the creative minds that brought them to life. Brought to you by the PulpNet. Learn more about the pulp magazines through articles, blogs, bibliographies, links, over 100 episodes of this podcast, and much more at the PulpNet. Your link to the pulp magazines for almost 30 years. Online at thepulp.net. Subscribe to Pulp Tales on your favorite podcast platform, or listen to us on the web at the PulpNet. If you enjoy our content, please like us or leave us a review. And tell your fellow pulp fans about Pulp Tales. Thank you for listening, and keep reading the pulps. Pulp Tales is copyright 2024 by William P. Lampkin.